Now, I would love to introduce you to our CEO, Amanda Mukwashi. Please come on up.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Those who are in the room, and also if we have others online, I hope that so far you're having a good start to the day. So as always, I came very prepared. You know, I did my research. I was very clear in my mind what I was going to talk about, and then I listened to Badi speaking. And then I was sitting there, and all of a sudden I thought, God, chuck that. Let me talk about something else. No. So I'm just going to ask, it's now 10:20, so please just give me a little nudge if I'm going over time. I love coming to the SWORD conference. I think I've spoken at this conference a couple of times before. And the reason that I love doing that and engaging with business people is not because I'm a business person myself. In fact, I think I would probably make a very poor entrepreneur. But when I first started my career, I worked for the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa. It's an organization, intergovernmental organization that focuses on trade and intra-regional trade, as well as intercontinental trade. It aims to facilitate the policies that would engage different actors in business. And I think when I was working for them, I really came to appreciate. My focus was on women in business, really looking at some of the challenges that women experience as they try to thrive in the area of doing good business. But I don't want to talk about COMESA. The reason I'm giving that background is I think my appreciation of the role of business in fighting poverty comes from back then, right? Whether it's business as a facilitator, as a vehicle through which people can access goods and services, whether it's a platform for people to step into, whether it is a channel for actually increasing employment. So I remember a woman who had a huge farm, and she decided that all the people she was going to recruit on her farm were going to be women, because she was actually trying to work within that community and make business meaningful to people every day. The last story I'm going to tell you, that's not true, but one of the stories that I'm going to tell you is a friend of mine who, she was here, we were together in Coventry, she's from Zimbabwe, and she was working as a care worker the same way that I was at the time. And she decided, you know, she was going to pack her bags and go back to Zimbabwe. And she was going to run a bakery. So she bought all the equipment that she needed from here, packed her bag, went to Zimbabwe. When she got there, she found that actually it wasn't working. So she decided to go into farming. I visited her 2 years ago, and she employs about 100 families. And because of her faith, but also I think her exposure, having lived in other parts of the world, she makes sure that these families have got access to education. She has an insurance policy that she's signed up for them to make sure they've got access to healthcare services. And she also looks at the nutrition that they have. So they're not just workers. She's made business mean something to these families. It's an everyday development. For them, they don't look at business or business people as something that is negative. They look at her entrepreneurial approach as something that has really helped them to look after their families, to send their children to school, and also the ones that she can identify that have good business acumen. She's beginning to train them and expose them to training that she's not able to provide, so that they can get the training to start their own businesses if they have their own business acumen. And so my focus this morning is really on when we talk about reimagining the social contract, I want to talk about how we make that social contract mean something on a daily basis to people in our communities. Communities here in the UK, but also communities in countries, for example, where Christian Aid works. And I think I said this the last time I spoke. I think that that meaningful social contract where everyday people can have an everyday experience of business and development is not going to come from the big, massive, global business entities. It's going to come from the small, the medium enterprises. I think it's really important for me to just talk about that. And so let's go back. We're having this conference at a time when, there's a smaller conference that's taking place in Glasgow. And all sorts of conversations are going on. And then there's another conference that's taking place in Glasgow outside the meeting rooms. It's taking place on the streets. And when you look at the demographics on those streets, I think the age range is probably 20s, between 20s and 30s. I think it's probably the millennials and Gen Z, Generation Z. I really wanted to drop that in just to show that I'm take that. But they have a different notion of what a future social contract looks like. Right? And somewhere in between, we have lost touch with that notion, that idea, that vision of a social contract that they have, and the social contract that we've become used to. We are in a church, which is good. There's a partnership between business and religion. And this is not new. So when you go back to some of the beginnings or the foundations of social contracts, business and religion have many times had what I call an unholy alliance that has set the foundations in place for the current social contract that we have. And those foundations and those pillars have not always been positive. So that's the first point that I want to make. That as we try to reimagine the future, a better partnership, as we try to reimagine a new social contract, let's just take a bit of time to look historically at what are the foundations and the pillars upon which we have built the current social contract. I could go back to 1455. when the church and business came together to trade. And that partnership set in motion the foundations of injustice. And those foundations still stand to this day. They look different, they feel different, perhaps sometimes they even experience different. But nevertheless, those foundations are still in place. Where we moved from being humanity that puts the dignity and worth of human beings at the center of the relationship between business and religion. And we put humanity as a product in the marketplace, so in that market square, right? We put humanity as the product that is traded in that partnership. And so capitalism developed and evolved and has really crystallized that trading in humanity. And it's those foundations that we need to dismantle. If we're going to come up with a new social contract, those are the foundations that we need to begin to remove. I had a discussion actually with Sam and with Buddy earlier on this week. And I have to ask myself the question, and maybe I don't have the right answers, but I'm going to pose this question to you as well. Is capitalism really bad? Right? And I'm just thinking, what type of question am I asking based on what Buddy was saying earlier on? So I'm not asking with an answer already. I'm genuinely asking, is capitalism really bad? And I think when you work for Christian Aid, when you see the type of things that we see, when you look, for example, at Afghanistan at the moment, and the fact that it's really challenging for us to deliver the much needed aid to Afghan citizens who are leaving the country, not because they don't want to be in Afghanistan, not because they don't love their country, but because there's no job, they're not getting paid. Because actually they can't feed their families, right? When you look at what is happening in Kenya in terms of drought and in terms of people being on the front lines of the climate crisis and the impact on their lives, and the fact that, we're in Glasgow having this small meeting, having a conversation about pledges, about commitments, and about promises, but not digging into our pockets to make sure that actually we deliver on that, then you see that you would be forgiven for saying actually capitalism is all bad. There's absolutely nothing good about it. Trickle-down economics does not work for the poor. It does not deliver justice. To the contrary, it delivers for the few wealthiest people and wealthiest nations. And whichever way you look at it, whether you look at gender justice, climate justice, racial justice, all the different elements, you see the threads of capitalism in there. And so you ask yourself the question, is capitalism actually able to deliver justice for everyone? And if you had asked me this question a while back, I would have said we just have to dismantle. In fact, I think I've been quoted as saying we just have to do away with capitalism and come up with something else, right? But the more I've had discussions, I think to myself, and the Zambian president was here last week on Friday, and I asked him, I said, you're a new president. There are many expectations on you. What is your brand of capitalism? Are you going to have capitalism with a social conscience? And what does that look like? Right? So just bear with me. I'm getting somewhere with all this talk. And so when I think about those questions, I want to ask you the same question. Because you are business people. You work within a capitalist model that is broken, that is not delivering justice. But you come to the conversation on business with a social conscience. So how can you place that social conscience to redefine the foundations of our world in terms of justice? Right? So when we have one of the most difficult conversations that has been taking place in Glasgow is a conversation around loss and damage and climate finance, right? Where you have people from Madagascar, people from the Pacific Islands saying, we contribute very little to carbon emissions. In fact, we've contributed almost nothing to the state of the world as it is today. You being wealthier nations, are contributing close to 80% of carbon emissions. And you have developed at the expense and at the cost of not just millions of poor people, but also at the expense of the planet. You have tested planetary boundaries and have gone outside of that and have put a threat, have threatened the very existence of this planet as we know it. Surely, let's have a conversation around repaying what has been broken and taking actions to do no harm as we go to the future. And that's a very difficult conversation. And so, the reason, if I can put before you, why that conversation is so difficult is because the structures and the systems that we still base our entire model on are structures and systems that were put in place hundreds of years ago. When we thought it was still okay to take a black person and sell them on the market square, we put in place systems and structures. We've stopped selling the black person on the market square, but the systems we have kept in place and the structures we have kept in place. Because those systems, and that's why those systems help us, not help, we are comfortable with those systems exploiting fossil fuels, for example, because the value system that keeps that going is a value system that says, I want to build my wealth at any cost. And that's the value system that needs to be broken, that needs to be dismantled. And until that is done, we will have many of these conferences and we'll be talking about reimagining a new social contract. Last two things that I want to say for today. Reimagining the social contract, therefore, will not just be about values, but even about mechanisms. That's not the right word. So we talk about economic growth. And everything is about growth. It's about growth. It's about growth. And I really want to ask, I hope you're going to discuss some of these things. what do you mean? What do we mean when we talk about growth? What are we growing and for whom? Right? In this country, Coventry is what I call home. And, every time you go to Coventry, your heart breaks, right? Because when the Chancellor says the economy is going to grow by so much, I don't think that people in Coventry, in their lives, that growth has meaning on a day-to-day basis in their lives. I think the city rejoices in that, but everyday people in places like Coventry, no, they don't. So we need to redefine what we mean by growth. We need to move from the monetary side, the financial side, to the quality side. We need to look at communities as the custodians of quality and growth and everyday democracy, everyday development, everyday. It needs to have a meaning in that community, in different communities. And that's why the last point that I'm going to come to is, that's why I started with, I believe that transformation is possible and doable through small and medium scale enterprises. Because I think that the big multinationals, I think they're too far gone. I really think that they're too far gone, right? They've created systems that now serve them rather than serve the people. I would probably argue that a bit like, governments, I think governments are now too far gone. The system that has been created serves them rather than serving the people. And so when the climate activists, and in the Glasgow conference, when you hear people like Greta, people like Vanessa say, this is an existential crisis, it's not just the climate existential crisis. We are at a tipping point where we need to reclaim through redefining our social contract. For those countries where Christian aid works, I think that you as small and medium, I'm sure maybe there might be some big businesses here, I think there's a real opportunity to connect with those communities in Kenya, in Malawi, in Zimbabwe, in Colombia, right? Yeah, the other night I was listening to indigenous communities talking about the Amazon and the fact that they're custodians of the forest, but the forest is being taken from them, right? How can we, as small businesses, connect with them at that level and safeguard, right? So there are three things that we need to do. We need to repair what has been broken. We need to safeguard what we have. And then we need to make sure that the new social contract will do no harm for the future. So repair, safeguard, and do no harm, right? And I think that we can do it. I really think the answer is no longer at the big centralized level. I think the answer is in the small, the medium, the community, the connection with other small, medium scale businesses that have really struggled. Let me leave you with a moment of hope. In the book of Ruth, if you read chapters 2 to 4, the book of Ruth is a very small book in the Bible, and but I suspect that if you read that story, the whole the whole book, for me it embodies the entire message of the Bible and the teachings of Jesus Christ. So I'm not going to preach about it, but I want to share with you the story of Boaz, a businessman with a social conscience, a businessman who was very successful, a businessman who put his faith at the heart of his business approach. And as a result, he was rewarded in such an incredible way because Boaz has contributed to the lineage of grace. When you trace the lineage of King David, of Jesus Christ, it goes all the way to Boaz. We will be rewarded. But I think, let's not think of ourselves as small and medium, because we might be small in terms of money, but let's think of ourselves as absolutely massive in terms of that social contract and that faith and the power to create ripples across the country and across the world of change. I think the world needs us. We have to stand up and answer the call. Thank you very much, and God bless.